So we'll start again with the second session. So good morning again. It's still morning, and really, I would like to thank first the organizers of this conference, the main organizers, not just Foundation, but also Heavy LGBTI plus, and all the other organizations that are really have partnered for making this conference happen. My name is Veronica FILIPPESCHI, and I work at the APT, Association for the Prevention of Torture. And we are very pleased to be supporting this conference today. And also, I'm very happy to be in this session, the second session of the conference, which is focused on vulnerabilities, access to rights, and access to services for LGBTIQ plus persons in prison and beyond. And this morning, I'm joined by two great speakers, Gergely Flegov and Patrick Berget, who will share really their insights on the situation of LGBTIQ plus persons deprived of liberty based on their extensive and direct experience on the ground. I will introduce a bit more in detail each of them later on. But I would like first to maybe spend a few words to introduce you to the organization I work with, the APT, and the work we do on this topic specifically. So we are an NGO, an international non-governmental organization that was founded more than 40 years ago here in Geneva. So we are based in Geneva, although we have some colleagues working abroad, and we work globally. So we work in different contexts in different regions of the world. And we are, the APT is, we can say, I think we are at the origin of this global system to prevent torture and ill treatment, which is really based on this idea that opening up places of detention, places of deprivation of liberty, really reduces the risk of torture happening in those places. So I'm very happy for this reason actually to share the panel with the other two speakers who are actually putting prevention into practice by monitoring the situation of persons deprived of liberty. And the theme of this conference is particularly important for the APT because we have been working actually to prevent torture and ill treatment against LGBTIQ plus persons deprived of liberty since a few years now. And we have been collaborating a lot with international and national mechanisms that actually do monitor places of deprivation of liberty, but also other actors that are key on this issue, as we've heard, LGBTI associations, organizations, and other allies. And we have developed a number of also materials and tools that some is available outside, but everything is on our website. We have produced some monitoring guides and tools for those who carry out the monitoring of places of detention, but also some online databases on prison with a specific focus on persons in situations of vulnerability, including LGBTIQI plus persons. And also we have recently developed a whole online platform with online courses on a number of topics, including this one that I invite you to check and consult. So the work we do at the APT, which is really aimed at preventing torture, what we do in practice is really trying to reduce the risk, the heightened risk of torture and ill treatment, but also to address the root causes of such violations. And this is with the aim to create really an environment where torture is less likely to happen. And we know that closed environments like deprivation of liberty, the context of deprivation of liberty is an environment where the risk of torture and ill treatment is very high. And then we've heard today, of course, that LGBTIQ plus people in prison, but also in other contexts of deprivation of liberty was mentioned before, migration-related detention, psychiatric institutions, but also police custody and others, are really at higher risk of torture and ill treatment in these environments. So by looking when I was invited to join this conference, and I looked at the title as well, I think it resonates very well with the work of torture prevention, because it is about the rights of LGBTI persons in prison, but also beyond prison. We've heard this morning a lot about the broader context. And I think what is important that we always stress is that what happens inside prisons and is really very much linked to what happens outside the prison walls. And the detention environment per se, we've heard already, so I'm trying not to be super repetitive, but it's very challenging for LGBTIQ plus persons, because there's often lack of transparency. So they're very closed environments where nobody from the public can easily access. There is a very strict division between the sexes, as Quentin was telling us, a very binary logic. There are still a lot of taboos around sexuality in this context. There is a lack, we've heard a lot about the lack of data disaggregated by gender identity and sexual orientation. And then there's also a lack of really adequate training for staff. But if we look at, we zoom out a bit and we look at the root causes of these violations that we heard today, I think many of them are to be found outside the context of detention. And many have been already mentioned, the criminalization of same-sex relationship in many countries still happening today, but also other provisions that impact in a disproportionate way the LGBTI community, like rules restricting sex work, we've heard from PRI before, rules and laws on drug use, or on moral and public decency, etc. And so, but also in the absence of such clear regulations or provisions or legislation, the reality is that in many more contexts, actually the discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation is really much entrenched in society, and it's magnified in the context of detention. And the other point I wanted to make is the lack of recognition of self-perceived gender identity. We've seen that it has an impact on the placement, of course, of LGBTIQ plus people, but also then once they're in detention, also on the exercise of their rights in detention. For instance, even the right to express one's gender identity while in detention through different means, meaning even clothes or hair or makeup, etc. But also just expressing affection between people in detention. And then we've heard about the standards quite a lot this morning. I think I just wanted to make a point there as well, because I think we also believe that there is a protection framework internationally that is a very strong basis. But it's also true that there are no specific standards, as was said, to protect the rights specifically of LGBTIQ plus people, and even more when it comes to detention. So we have soft law looking at detention, the Nelson Mandela rules, the Bangkok rules, and other rules for children. But it's not easy when it comes to LGBTIQ plus people, because there's no equivalent for this population. So it's very challenging when working in this environment without having that framework. Although at the regional level, in some regions, there has been an attempt and some developments there, notably at the Inter-American level, I think, recently, with the Inter-American Court advisory opinion on these issues. And we've heard as well that once in detention, really LGBTIQ plus people face a number of risks of abuse and even torture. So I wanted to mention just briefly, of course, the violence we've heard from both staff and detainees, and discriminatory practices as well is quite common to see segregation that we've seen, isolation, but also lack of, which is linked to isolation actually, lack of access to meaningful activities for this population, and lack of access, of course, to healthcare, which is actually a common problem, I think, for the whole prison population in many countries, and even more so for this community. And then another, I think, discriminatory practice that I wanted to mention, because I think I didn't hear it so much so far, is, for instance, the contact with the outside world. And when it comes to visits from partners, for instance, it is an area that is very much affecting LGBTIQ plus people because of the denial, for instance, of visits from same-sex partners, but also because we've heard many LGBTIQ plus people in detention are also have suffered rejection from their own family, so they don't have that support anymore. And in many contexts, detainees rely a lot on the support by their families, and it is not the case often for LGBTIQ plus people. So the community associations working on this is really key, and sometimes their access is also restricted in some contexts. And so I think I don't want to go more in detail. I think we will hear much more from the next speakers, but just would like to conclude to mention a few, I think, elements that we thought are very important when it comes to preventing torture and ill-treatment of this population in prison, but also in other contexts of deprivation of liberty. And I think one was already mentioned, but I think I would like to stress it again, is really the collection of data and making that data available to inform really policies and procedures in detention. So data that it is aggregated by gender identity and sexual orientation, but at the same time, because we know that there is a structural discrimination, the data collection has to be really done carefully, but also the use of data has to be really done carefully, following very basic principles of confidentiality, privacy, and also on a voluntary basis, no? Because this can create many challenges for individuals that are affected. And just to give you an example, there are countries, actually I bring examples from Latin America. We work quite a lot in that context. Even those countries where there is some official prison data, I'm thinking about Argentina or Uruguay, where they really have data on trans people in detention. Just to give you an example, in Argentina, they were counted 139 trans people out of more than 100,000 detainees in prison, just in prison, and these are just trans people. So it doesn't even, they don't even count all the other individuals of this group when we put all them together in the LGBTIQ plus acronym. There's no official data on others than trans, and even the trans is really very let's say under I think estimated because of what we've heard before, no? Discrimination and fear also of just talking about their own gender identity, etc. And Uruguay is the same. They've calculated 28 trans people in prison out of 15,000 people in prison, and it's just data on trans persons, so not on lesbian or gay or intersex people or queer. No, there's no data on that at all. The other element I wanted to mention is the risk, the needs and risk assessment from the first moment of admission to a prison, but also during the detention on a regular basis. This is a very key aspect that for us as APT, we always stress because it's a way to really identify vulnerabilities from the beginning, including when it comes to LGBTIQ plus people, and also identifying the needs and so provide for these needs during detention. And we also are aware, because we work a lot with partners in the countries, we are aware that there have been developments in recent years. There have been countries who have adopted some policies or procedures at the level of the prisons to have a differentiated approach for this population, but also, for instance, when it comes to practices like body searches or placement, we've heard placement based on self-perceived gender identity in some countries, but it's still quite limited. If we look at the importance of the problem, the good examples are still quite limited, but I think it's good to see the development over time as well. And the other element that we thought is quite important is this monitoring by external bodies that are independent. So we work a lot with these bodies, and we really believe that this is very key in bringing in the visibility, so making the situation visible, so also contributing to have this data that is lacking, but then checking what our colleague was saying before about this gap between the law and the practice. I think monitoring is really key to really actually check on the practice and see whether there is this gap and how to make this implementation advance as well. And finally, all of this, I think we always encourage monitoring bodies, for instance, to engage very, very closely with LGBTIQ plus people and associations, individuals, activists in their monitoring. So some of them have included representatives of these communities in their own staff, or the majority have consultation on a regular basis. And there is an example that I wanted to bring in because I think it was last year. There was a whole country level inspection monitoring in Brazil by the National Preventive Mechanism, which we called it. So there's this monitoring bodies at the national level, joining forces with LGBTI organizations, doing the monitoring together, because often the association don't have the same access as these bodies. So it's a way to really join forces. And it was quite a milestone, I think, and it's quite a positive. I think we will be hearing more this afternoon from a colleague who was involved in there. So just not to go further, I wanted to introduce the next speaker of this session. So Gergely Fligov is a criminologist and a psychologist, and he is currently a member of the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, with a very large and extensive experience in monitoring the situation of persons deprived of liberty in Hungary, but also in many other European countries. And he also worked in the past for the Hungarian prison service in different capacities as well. So, Gergely, you have the